Welcome to this episode of Criminology Chats, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of crime, justice, and everything in between. I'm your host, JR, and with me today, as she was for part one of this, is Alahna. Hello, Alahna.
Hey, JR. I am so excited to be here for the second part of the case, and I hope that the listeners are ready.
I hope so too. But first, we got to take care of a few things up front, like some disclaimers, okay? So we're going to start with those. This episode contains explicit content, such as physical violence and domestic abuse, as well as other explicit comments that may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
This podcast episode is for informational purposes only and does not constitute psychological, medical, legal, or professional advice. The speakers, myself, and JR in this episode are not psychological professionals, and the opinions and comments by us are solely for entertainment purposes. Items discussed in this episode include information provided in emails by an incarcerated individual, and the speakers are commenting on what is reflected in those emails.
Additional information for this episode was obtained from Murphy's 1997 and 2008 public documents related to those two United States Courts of Appeals for the Armed Forces. Listeners can find a copy of the appeal at Just the Law website at law.justia.com. All you have to do is type in his name and it should pop up.
In this episode, we have information furnished by one of Murphy's military defense attorneys, Rich Vitaris. We will talk about Murphy's results of the psychological testing done with Murphy a decade and more after his conviction. Let's get started.
When we ended part one, Murphy was being transferred to a military base in Germany called Hanau, Germany, and the Army sent him there. This is where we start with this episode. When he arrived there at Hanau in West Germany, it's now Germany, but West Germany back then, so I want to keep it with that time period. He said the first thing he noticed was how festive the country was and how the American soldiers were grossly intertwined in the culture, meaning they drank and partied a lot. In his emails to us, he said, and I quote, "That is not what I wanted to do. So for 6 months, I just kept to myself, but that made things lonelier for me." Eventually, he decided to start going out, and the temptation got to him, and he started drinking. He claims that the local German nationals always wanted to see if the Americans could handle drinking the stronger German beer. I just want to add in here, I was stationed in Germany. Yes, it's strong beer, but so good. Anyway, okay. I'm not advocating anybody drink, though. Just want to make sure that's not what we advocate on this show. According to Murphy, the more he went out, the more he became ingrained into the culture. And at this point, he communicated to us that he was going out every night and drinking. In one of his emails to us, he said, and I quote, "I remember lying on my bed in the barracks and saying to myself, there has got to be something better than this."
There's got to be. Drinking every night? Couldn't be me.
That's right.
At this time, Murphy was dating a Russian woman he identified as Nellie. He claims he confided to her about his abusive background and about his nightmares of seeing his mother being abused. It eventually became too much for her, and they ended up breaking up. So Murphy described the incident when he first met his future wife, Petra. So he and Nellie, his ex-girlfriend that we just talked about, were out drinking at a club called The Village. They were walking around, and this guy gave her a rose, which he felt was extremely disrespectful. So he took it and he threw it down at this guy's feet. The guy did not like that, so they had a standoff. I quote, "I thought we were going to fight one another." Right during this commotion, a petite young woman came and stood right in the center of Murphy and this man and looked up at Murphy smiling and said, "Would you like to dance?" Murphy obviously responded yes, and grabbed her hand and went to the dance floor where they stayed the rest of the night. And he eventually found out that her name was Petra. So during the evening, and I quote, "She loved the way I dressed, danced, and carried myself. I was impressed that she took that much interest in me. I was flattered because no one has ever taken that much interest in me before, but more importantly, she thought I was very sexy. We hit it off very well."
Well, that sounds good. I mean, one thing there is, I guess Nellie was just left to the devices or vices of the guy who gave her the rose that was thrown on the floor.
I guess so.
Okay, what can you say? Plus, she was Russian. That could have caused problems.
Yeah,
We still in the Cold War, you know. In his emails, Murphy described being in Germany, and I quote, "Germany was great. The people, the culture, and the festive atmosphere. The people embraced me, especially Petra's family. I never meant to harm any of them. I love Petra's mother. She did a lot for me. Gabby and Horace, my brother and sister-in-laws, love me, and I love them. They were my white brother and sister, and I would do anything for them. I did not care too much for Gabby's husband because he beat her, and that infuriated me. I could see where that would if he's witnessed a lot of that in his past there.
Correct. I think that really could trigger some things in him.
Yeah. Murphy explained that his military career was taken off and he went to military leadership schools in preparation for him becoming a sergeant. He was subsequently promoted to sergeant and put in leadership roles. He claims the soldiers he supervised loved him and that he would do anything for them. As Murphy stated in one of his emails, and I quote, I was the definition of a soldier and I loved every minute of it. And he said this allows people, and I quote, to live out the American dream and take the fight to the enemy to keep America free. And I just want to interject something here. Where he was at in Hanau, that when it was East and West Germany, that's kind of the lower part of East Germany coming down, and that's where everybody suspected that the East Germans and Russians would come across the border if in any attack. And your life expectancy as a soldier living up near that was approximately 1 to 2 minutes, believe it or not, once they come
Wow.
across that border. Yeah,
That
it
is
wasn't
crazy.
very long. Yeah. Anyway, Murphy went on to say, and I quote, if you want to be a crook, you have that right to do that until you get caught because of the liberties you have as an American. Being a criminal is wrong, so don't get it twisted. What I'm saying is that the military makes it possible to have these liberties. Yeah.
So February 14th, Valentine's Day of 1985, Murphy had to go on emergency leave back to the United States to attend a funeral for an uncle. In his email, he said, and I quote, I went to Petra's apartment to tell her that I would be leaving for the States in an hour, and I asked her if I could get her pregnant, and she said yes. According to
That's pretty
Murphy,
straightforward, I would say.
I would say, because how do you know it's going to work?
There you go.
That was my question when I read that. So, according to Murphy, she was taking a big risk in getting pregnant because she already had one child out of wedlock with an ex-military soldier. In his email, Murphy said, and I quote, Black guys over there love taking advantage of these girls and getting them pregnant, then leaving for the States, leaving them to support the child on their own. He continued in his email, and I quote, I had to convince her that I was not leaving her and that I was coming back. I had no reason to lie, and besides, I wanted to be with her, and I wanted her to be my wife. I didn't know how I was going to explain me marrying a white girl to people, but my mom dated a white guy in the 60s and produced my sister, Priscilla, who was born in 1963. The black girls in my unit were pissed and called me a traitor, but I've never been the type that believed that I had to date my own race. Michael Jackson said it best. I'm not going to spend my life being a color, and it doesn't matter if you are black or white.
That was very unique, probably back in the 60s and in the South, in North Carolina, where his mother dated a white gentleman and they
Correct.
had a daughter from that relationship. So Murphy went on to tell us in emails that he was a great military leader and initially was supposed to be sent to Italy instead of Germany. In an email, he said, I wonder if my life would have turned out different if I had gone to Italy. Great leaders are made, not born, and I was made into a great leader. I was headed to drill sergeant school, airborne and air assault school when the unthinkable happened. Murphy said when he returned to Germany after attending his uncle's funeral, he learned that Petra was pregnant. In his email, he said, and I quote him, so we got it on the first try. He also said, I want this more than anything in the world because I wanted to be something better than my father or dad.
That
You
is
should be so lucky as to get someone who could do that on the first try, Alana.
on the first try. I mean, come on. You rarely get that lucky. It just had to be fate, right?
There you go.
All right, let's talk about what Murphy said about Petra. Murphy said that Petra was a great mother, a great friend, and a great wife. She was not the problem, even though he tried to make her out to be at the bad advice of his attorney. As we told our listeners in the beginning, we will hear from one of Murphy's defense attorneys later on in this episode. So, when Murphy met Petra, she had a 3-year-old son named Tim by an ex-military soldier named Tim. He was so smart, and at 3 years old, he spoke German and English fluently. In his emails, Murphy indicated that he loved Tim and that Tim called him dad. Murphy even said everyone thought he was his biological son. Did not want to have the baby out of wedlock. They planned to get married before the baby was born. As Petra's belly began to swell, they drew closer and closer together. Murphy said, we were meant to be together. Petra lived about 15 minutes from his military base in a town called Offenbach, West Germany. And he would visit during the weekdays and stay at her place over the weekends.
I've actually been to Offenbach and Hanau, but we won't go there. But never to the club, the Village, there at Village. I was never there, so don't worry about that, listeners. Okay. In one of his emails, Murphy described Petra as becoming depressed as her pregnancy progressed. He attributed this to the fact that so many military men used her and left her, so according to Murphy, he had to constantly reassure her he was different and not going to leave her. Another thing he pointed out was his lack of positive role models in his life from whom he would draw strength and encouragement. As he said, and I quote, "It was a daily battle not to become like them," meaning the bad role models he had seen and been witness to when he was living in Clinton, North Carolina. Murphy said around 6 months into the pregnancy, the thought of becoming a father overwhelmed him. He said, and I quote, "Because the thoughts of being my dad scared me, and the thoughts of all the abusive men in my life from ages 8 to 14 convinced me that I would be no better than them." He knew he needed therapy, but alleged that the time in the military, treatment for someone like him with mental issues was not a priority. The military was more focused on people that were diagnosed with PTSD. In his email, one of them, and I quote, "I was pushed to the side, so I suffered immensely." Now, I can comment a little bit about that. In the military back in those days, going and seeing any professional in the psychological field was not looked upon favorably. So I just want you to know that. Unless you did suffer from some type of PSD due to a wartime situation versus non-wartime. So that's not totally out of character.
No kidding. That's good to know. So Murphy and Petra were married on the 5th of August, 1985 in Denmark. However, they were married at the Hanau Military Base Church in a traditional church with a traditional church wedding on the 30th of August, 1985. So Petra's family attended along with friends. Murphy said about 2 weeks before his biological son was born, he and Petra separated because, as he said in his email, and I quote, "My demons surfaced from my childhood, and I was not the man, husband, and father that I could be." Murphy said his separation was about 4 months. Murphy moved back in with Petra and her sons. He said while he was separated from Petra, he met another German woman named Beat. At this time, he claims they were only friends and nothing more. In his own words, and I quote, "I had no intentions of entering in a relationship with her. We just talked about the problems we were having in our marriages. I really do not know when we started getting serious."
One thing I want to point out for the listeners too is when you hear from his defense attorney later on, we're going to pronounce her name Beat, but I think he pronounced it Beata. That's not two people. It's still the same one. His demons wasn't so bad that he wanted to repair his relationship with her, I don't think. He found this other young lady or lady, and then they were not getting serious according to him, but I think they ended up serious as we'll see as we go through this. In June of 1986, Murphy moved out of his place with Petra again and moved in this time with Beat. Murphy said, and I quote, "Moving in with another woman did not solve my problem, so I do not know why I did it. My heart was with Petra and the kids. So why did he, never
Why
mind.
did he do it in the first place?
Exactly. He blames his wrongdoing on the devil and said, whenever you are doing wrong, the devil always finds a way to keep you from doing right. In his email, he took responsibility by saying it was his decision not to go back home with Petra after he moved out the second time and the children. So he's taking some responsibility there. He claims he was too embarrassed to go back because he felt that he had failed her and the children. He indicated that he had failed himself too. He decided to take Beat and go back to the United States, though, where he alleges he met with an attorney and successfully obtained a legal divorce from Petra. He did this because, in his words, the German courts were taking too long to grant the divorce between them. Says he really wants to be with her. That's where he wants to be. But yet he says in his own emails, hey, the courts were taking too long to give us that divorce. Murphy then married Beat in North Carolina at a justice of the peace with one of his sisters and a cousin attending the ceremony. What do you think about that?
Oh, questionable things that he did, but I feel like back then it probably wasn't too frowned upon.
No, I guess not. Yep.
Yeah, I guess not. It appeared that he and Beat's life was moving forward. He and Beat were planning to return to the United States together because Murphy had military orders back to the States. In one of his last emails, he said, and I quote, "I hated what I'd allowed myself to become, so I became a great pretender." He claims due to his mental health, he went to the local military clinic and they gave him 1 week of bed rest. Murphy said something in an email that was very interesting. He said, and I quote, "I spoke to my first sergeant and he jokingly gave me some ill advice which was used against me at trial. He said, 'Kill the bitch,' which I did not take kindly to." He said he told some of his friends the comment made by the first sergeant, and Murphy claims they twisted it and used it against him at his trial, saying that he had said those comments and not the first sergeant.
Yeah, we don't know. We didn't talk with the first sergeant to find out if that was his advice or not, but it's kind of strange that that came up in his email. So nothing we prompted him to tell us. He just put this in an email to us,
He
okay?
did, and it
Yep.
wasn't prompted at all. It was just kind of like,
Like
whoa,
there it is. Yeah, there it
hello.
is. Yep. A week before the incident, he's calling this whole situation an incident in most all these emails, okay? Just for the listeners. Murphy was directed by his commanding officer to make sure all his affairs were in order with Petra and the children before he left the country, going back to the United States on his assignment back there in Alabama. While he was still in Germany, Petra and the children would come to his military unit once a month, and he would give her the agreed upon monthly payment in cash. And the reason for that is back then, your service members were paid once a month at the end of the month. And most of the time, they could still get their money in cash versus a check because automatic deposit wasn't available and all that good stuff. So you literally got paid in cash. He said, and I quote, "It was a great way for me to see the kids. She came by at other times as well to ask me to go to church or bring me a Bible or scripture to read, or simply just to spend time with me and so I could spend time with the kids too. Petra was very much in love with me and I her. It's undeniable, and I was the problem, not her." According to Murphy, he wanted to make sure Petra and the children were going to be receiving monthly money out of his regular pay for her and the children once he left Germany. So he claims he needed her address to put on the necessary paperwork to facilitate the monthly support payments. However, Murphy did not know where Petra was residing, and he didn't know whether he would see her before he actually left Germany.
So Murphy asked Beat, his current wife, if she could have her friend that works for the Germany phone company obtain Petra's address for him. I mean, I can't imagine my husband coming home and asking for his ex-wife's phone number or address.
I know, exactly.
I think it'd be a little strange. So now Murphy has her address, and initially all he did was fill out the paperwork and turn it in so Petra would start receiving the monthly support payments. Murphy claims that he can't remember if it was the 16th or the 17th of August when the incident happened. Let's call it what it is. It's murder. We know it was Sunday, August 16th. On this day, Murphy was celebrating in preparation to leave Germany the following week after what the military terms as clearing his unit before departing on the 21st of August, going to his new military assignment in Alabama. In his emails, Murphy said, and I quote, "It was never my intention to go see Petra again because it was too painful leaving her and the kids in Germany. It was a tradition when a soldier left an overseas assignment, his friends would buy beer and liquor to get the person drunk. So according to Murphy, his friend wanted that for him, but in his words, and I quote, I never liked getting drunk, so I decided to stay home and drink with Beat."
Yeah, yet he had been drinking, almost every night out, and he didn't like getting drunk, but he was staying home, and I'm assuming he wasn't going to get drunk there at home with Beats. So it did not last. Him being at Beats and Murphy decided to go out for a few hours to the clubs. So again, he's decided he wants to go out to the clubs to see friends before leaving Germany. He was supposed to start clearing Monday the 17th through the 20th of August, and that's why he told Beat that he only wanted to go out for a few hours and he would be back around midnight. He went to a local club called the Skyline Club where he saw a few friends, and according to him, they kept pestering him to drink. So he had been drinking at Beats, but when he went out, I guess he wasn't drinking, but they kept pestering him to. So he claims he refused over and over, as he said in his emails, finally caved in, and they kept bringing me drinks, and I hated it, but pretended to be having fun. Yeah, I guess I could say that too. If I was ever out and friends were buying me drinks, I could tell them, hey, I hate this, but I'm probably going to end up having fun because we know what alcohol does after a while. It starts to affect your inhibitions and everything else, and you kind of start having fun. Some people get more aggressive fun. Some people just get fun. And I guess some people just get sleepy fun. I don't know how
Uh,
to explain that. But anyway,
I'm a sleepy fan.
sleepy fun. So we know not to go out and have never mind, a drink with Alana. Sleepy fun. Okay. At some point, he claimed he left the club to sit in his car because he did not want to drink anymore. He said, my mind was on leaving Germany, Petra and the kids. a spirit of sadness came over me, and that is when I looked down and there was Petra's address in the cup holder. After seeing her address, he says to himself, and in the emails he quotes, I quote, "Let me go see her to let her know that I was leaving this week so I could square some things away with her," whatever that meant. According to Murphy, he had no idea how to drive to her place with only the address. And that's, we don't, back then you didn't have, Google Maps or anything like that. So even though you had the address, if you didn't know the town, which most service members wouldn't know the town, you wouldn't know how to get there. So he decided to take a taxi ride to the address because taxis know where to go over there at that time. So he got in a taxi, gave him the address, said, "Take me there." So they drove him there. So now he knew how to get there. And he asked the taxi to take him back to the club where his car was parked, which the taxi did. Okay. So now in my mind, that's a little pre-planning, you would think, but we won't go there.
I was just thinking the same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Murphy drove back to Petra's apartment and sat in his car. So he clearly remembered how to get there. He was obviously not too inebriated to know how to get from the bar to her house.
Right.
It was a fairly short drive. I mean, I don't know. He claimed to be very nervous because he was doing exactly what he did not want to do, and that was leave Petra and the children. In his email, he said, and I quote, "I had failed in every aspect and I was ashamed. My plan was to tell Petra those exact words, hoping that she would forgive me and we'd depart on good terms. We were not on bad terms, but for my sanity."
In his words, also, he said, "Finally, I bolstered up enough nerves to get out of the car and go up to the apartment." Now, I want you to imagine this is a high-rise apartment, and over there for security measures, they have intercoms on the outside, okay, and you hit a button, and it has your name, it has the name on there, and you hit that button, and it rings in that apartment, and then they can buzz you in, let you come in. So he said he stood outside the building entrance and rang the intercom bell to her apartment and waited. She subsequently answered, and Murphy told her it was him, and she buzzed him in immediately, according to him. He went to the fifth floor of the building where her apartment was and knocked on the door. Petra let him in, and in Murphy's words, she was smiling from ear to ear. I could tell she was happy to see me as I was her. She invited me in.
So, also according to Murphy, at this time, Petra called for her stepson Tim and said, "Look who's here. It is Daddy." Supposedly, Tim ran and grabbed a hold of Murphy's leg and said, "Daddy, I miss you." Murphy picked him up and held him, and they were inseparable the rest of the night. Murphy said that Petra had brought Jay, their son, to him and put him in Murphy's lap. Murphy claimed that Petra was so happy and they all sat at the kitchen table and talked. In Murphy's own words, quote, "Tim was so clingy and told me about everything going on in his life. He was so smart and I loved him." At some point, Jay fell asleep and Petra put him in his crib and closed the door. Murphy, at Tim's request, read him a bedtime story and Tim fell asleep. Murphy said he and Petra sat in the living room and reminisced about when they had first met and the good times that they had. Murphy indicated they held each other close as they shared those moments, and he regretted in his heart the day that he had walked out on her. In his email, he said, quote, "I was surprised she allowed me to hold her with the smell of alcohol on me. She felt so good, warm, and soft, just as I remembered when we held each other in the past. I wanted desperately to make love to her, but dare not ask." So one thing that also jumped out to me when he had said this and about her opening the door immediately was, did it not cross her mind how he figured out where she lived?
Yeah, I guess not, because he didn't know where she lived until his current wife got him the address. Yeah, I know. I guess not. I guess she was so happy to see him smiling ear to ear.
I guess so.
Yeah, that would have been one of my questions is, how did you find me?
Yeah.
Before I ever do anything else, how'd you find me? But okay. Yeah. Now we got to remember this is coming from him, but eventually he was in the apartment. We know that. So, yeah. So Murphy said the more he sat with her and the more his blood became saturated with alcohol, to point out that he drove, he was cognizant enough to know how to get back to her apartment, cognizant enough to have a taxi drive him there first and bring him back to his car. Then, and so he didn't have anything to drink there in her apartment because he said she didn't keep alcohol and she didn't drink. But yet now his blood is becoming saturated with alcohol based on what he had drank earlier. Now, he said he zoned out at times and alleged that Petra would call his name and he would, and that would bring him back into the moment. He remembered talking with her about putting the children on a plane and getting them passports to come see him in the United States, to which allegedly she agreed. In his words in the email he sent, I had expressed to her that it was important for me to stay connected with the kids. At this point, according to Murphy, there was a slight misunderstanding. Now, this is his words, slight misunderstanding about how he was going to stay connected with the kids. He says they had an argument.
So at this point, according to Murphy, he could not remember what happened because he had supposedly blacked out. And if you don't know what blacking out means, that's pretty much just everything going dark from drinking way too much. Your system pretty much shuts down. So Murphy said in one of his emails, I do remember that I struggled with Robert Earl, my mother's boyfriend and abuser. I thought I was literally hitting him, and I remember saying to him as I hit him how he destroyed my life as well as my mother's.
To me, he's saying here that he's hitting Robert Earl, but we know that it's somebody else he's hitting.
Yep. So the next thing Murphy claims he remembered was waking up in the parking lot about a mile from he and Beat's house. It was about 2 or 3 a.m., and he knew that Beat would be pissed. So he decided to drive to a store, and he grabbed himself another beer before heading home, and he had no clue as to what had transpired when he got home. He was questioned by Beat about his whereabouts because she thought he was cheating on her. So she got the car keys to leave, but he blocked the door and convinced her that he was not cheating on her. But he admitted he could have made love to Petra if she wanted to, and if he had the nerve to ask her when he was inside her apartment. And then he made up some story about stopping by the unit and playing cards with some of his friends.
Yeah. Now, I just want to interject here. If I told my wife that I had been out and seen an ex, which we've been married for 41 years, so I don't even know if any of my exes are still alive. But anyway, I was only married once, so say an ex-girlfriend. And I come back and told her that, I could have made love to my ex. I don't know, but they might have to be an ambulance call to my residence because I may be in trouble from something, okay, or
From
my
a girl's
bag be
perspective.
packed or whatever, from my wife's perspective. And I'm just assuming that if your boyfriend came to you and said, one of my ex-girlfriends, I could have made love to her here the other night. Sorry about that.
His bags would have been packed immediately.
Anyway, so I digress and we move on. So Murphy said the following morning he left and started clearing his military unit so he could leave Germany for Alabama at the end of the week. Now we know at this time that he has killed not only Petra, but the 2 kids. And he goes back to his unit the next day after going back home with Beat, and he goes in business as usual and starts what we call clearing to his unit so he can go back to his next go back to the States with his next assignment. In his email, he says, I still have no clue as to what had transpired or even if I had done anything. Subsequently, Murphy arrived at his new military duty station in Redstone Arsenal, Alabama. He was there a few days when he called his mom to let her know that he was back in the States and in Alabama, and she told him that Petra and the kids were dead. Now, he claims this is when he first found out they were dead.
So according to Murphy, he was destroyed and asked his mother if she knew what had happened, but she didn't have any of the details. So Murphy called Beat, who was still in Germany. She told him that she had been interviewed and asked him if he had killed them. Murphy denied it to her and said in his email that he admitted that he had gone to see Petra that Sunday evening to see her and the kids and to discuss visits with the kids and how to get passports, but he denied any involvement with the murders. Murphy said, and I quote, I had no reason to lie to her, and you cannot lie about what you don't know. You only know what you know. So B told him that the Army Criminal Investigation Division was coming to Redstone to interview him. Murphy said at this time if he wanted to flee, he could have, but he had nothing to hide.
There you go. He had nothing to hide. So he didn't leave. And it's kind of hard to leave anyway. Military keeps up with you, but yes, I guess he could have left. And Murphy claims what happened next was that when he was interviewed by Army CID, they told him he was not a suspect, and it looked like his wife Beat killed them. Murphy said this threw him for a loop, so he immediately began to make up stories to clear Beat. Murphy said in his email, and I quote, since I did not know what happened, I had to put something together based upon what they told me. He claims all these statements he made were based on what he was told by the CID special agents. He claims he was coerced into making false statements that he murdered them, meaning Petra and the 2 kids, just to protect Beat.
So let's talk about what we found out in the public trial documents during our research into this case. So we discovered that he'd confessed to killing Petra and the children on 5 separate occasions to the CID agents and to 2 other prisoners he was confined with. He gave details on how he killed them, which we will not share, but it was gruesome. He admitted to cleaning the crime scene, which took him around 4 hours before leaving to go home to beat. He admitted to wiping down the murder weapon and all surfaces he thought that he'd touched. However, one of his prints was found at the scene. Until the night of the murders, Murphy had not been to Petra's apartment, so he was asked to draw a sketch of the apartment and how he moved through the apartment at the time of the murders. There was something in the apartment that only the killer would have known, and that was a newly purchased bag of diapers. Earlier that day, Petra had purchased said diapers. So in the sketch, Murphy accurately labeled the diapers correctly and where they were in the apartment. So later, he claimed he was given all the information to draw on the sketch by the CID agents because he could not remember doing anything on Sunday night based on his dissociative episode. This was never proven that the CID agents fed him the information for the sketch.
Yeah, that's again, in my opinion, just, I hate to say this, but it's him just trying to, get out of trouble by saying, hey, I was fed all the information and that I put down. I was trying to protect Beat. I didn't do this. So this is just one, big misunderstanding. Okay, we're going to take a moment now and let our listeners hear from one of Murphy's defense attorneys at the time of his trial, Rich. During his interview, you will hear in the background his canine barking. So I just want listeners to know that that's something that is in the interview with him. We already know that Murphy was found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to death. However, his death sentence was commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole later on. Rich was asked about the defense strategy going into the trial, and here's what he had to say about that.
Well, I remember that very well because we put a lot of thought into it. And the biggest thing for the government was that Sergeant Murphy had had multiple confessions, 4 or 5 of them. One of the questions was, why didn't you try to suppress confession number 1? Why didn't you try to suppress confession number 2? And it's because there were 5 confessions. We weren't going to get 5 confessions suppressed. So we had to come up with a defense theory that would explain why he might have confessed 5 times. And when we began talking to the people he confessed to, the common denominator was that in each instance, he indicated that he wanted to keep his second wife, Beata, out of it, or that he had made the confession to protect a loved one. I think he told one of the 5 people he confessed to. So we had to come up with a theory that would explain, if he's not guilty, why did he confess? And why did he confess 5 times? He confessed minutes after walking out of the defense counsel's office in Redstone Arsenal, Alabama. Now, every Army criminal lawyer, every criminal lawyer in the country, the first thing they will tell a client is keep your mouth shut. Don't discuss the case with anybody. So why would Sergeant Murphy walk out of his defense counsel's office in Alabama knowing he'd just been arrested for murder and then immediately confess and immediately say he wanted to keep Beata out of it? So that's how we happened on the Beata might have done it. It was a defensive theory that allowed us to explain the multiple confessions, and it was consistent with things he said to each of the 5 people he confessed to. Even in the first confession with the CID agent properly acknowledged that what immediately preceded him making his confession was when it was suggested, well, then if you didn't do it, then we'll have to consider who else might have done, such as Beata. And that's when he confessed.
Okay.
That was kind of why we came up with the theory we did, because it was the only defensive theory that could explain away the multiple confessions.
So Rich had the following to say when asked about the weaknesses in the prosecution's case against Murphy.
Weakness in the government's case was that they were completely relying on the confessions of Sergeant Murphy, and they had very little physical evidence linking him to the crime scene. Today, I think that would be much more troublesome for the government, because people expect in these days of watching CSI on television there to be DNA evidence and other physical evidence, and DNA didn't really exist back then. And there was no blood found on his clothing. There really was very little linking him to the crime scene, other than the fact that the Army criminal investigators, the CID, had very cleverly had him draw a diagram of where things were in the apartment. And that allowed, I think, the prosecutor to connect him to the crime scene.
We asked Rich about the fact that in this particular instance, based on what we know how Murphy committed this crime, that we know there would be a lot of blood and blood spatter at the crime scene. So he talks briefly about that.
There was plenty of blood all over the place, but there wasn't any on Sergeant Murphy. And I think that's why I said at the outset, I think that was the biggest weakness in the prosecution's case.
Definitely.
And that's why they were forced to rely almost completely on his multiple confessions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why our strategy was to attack the confessions by coming up with an alternate theory for why he confessed as often as he did.
Right.
And today, I think juries tend to expect there to be physical evidence.
Yep.
Because they see that on TV all the time. And in fact, they'd want to see DNA evidence, not just, blood evidence.
Right.
And so it would be harder to convict Sergeant Murphy today than it would have been then.
I definitely agree with that.
Next, we asked Rich to comment on what type of psychological evaluations Murphy received by the military prior to his trial. And here's what he had to say.
Was to request a sanity board, which was done. Sergeant Murphy would have gone to the 97th General Military Hospital in Frankfurt. And I believe it was 2 psychiatrists and a psychologist. And they examined him, and their conclusion was that he did have the mental capacity to form the requisite intent if he were found guilty, and that he was mentally competent to assist in his defense and stand trial. That was the other thing they would look into.
Right.
Was the accused competent to stand trial? And they answered yes to both of those questions. And then the defense, because it was a capital case, asked for additional psychiatric evaluation. And the military judge said no, because there was nothing in the findings of the sanity board to indicate that additional evaluation might have helped. We didn't think there was any reason to question the correctness of the board's finding, other than the general impression that I think laymen would have is somebody who is accused of killing or may have killed their ex-wife, their own 21 or 22-month-old son, and a 5 or 6 year old son. You don't kill, there's people who will say, well, you've got to be crazy if you kill 3 people. But that's not what the law says.
Well, thank you, Rich, for giving us your insight on this case and your professional opinion you gave us. And we appreciate you taking your time and being here for this episode. About 5 years later, in April 1993, Murphy had a complete psychological workup done by Miss Jill Miller, a forensic social worker. We never contacted her or anything to get her opinion because she probably wouldn't have said anything to us anyway, based on the fact of mental health, and professionals don't release that type of information to just us lonely podcasters. So one of the psychological professionals that examined Murphy was Dr. William A. O'Connor, a clinical psychologist. Dr. O'Connor administered clinical tests, interviewed Murphy, and examined much of the evidence gathered by the forensic sociologist. Dr. O'Connor concluded that, in his opinion, at the time of the alleged offense, Murphy suffered from personality disorder and other psychological dysfunctions which would have affected his thoughts and or actions. There are indications of minimal or slight cognitive and neuropsychological dysfunction. However, the primary origin or cause of the personality disorder was associated post-traumatic features, which can be specified based on clinical interviews and records, as well as test results indicating persistent and severe traumatic childhood abuse. And we know he had that based on, in part 1, and what he told us in his emails. No doubt he's had a traumatic childhood and severe abuse there.
I do agree. So, furthermore, Dr. William H. Carson, a professor of psychiatry at the Medical University of South Carolina, reviewed Murphy's case and the psychological and sociological evidence. He concurred with Dr. O'Connor's findings. Dr. Edward C. Kirby, a psychiatrist with over 33 years of practice, was consulted and concluded Murphy's severe mental disease or defect rendered him unable to form the requisite intent to commit premeditated murder. Dr. Kirby also concluded that Murphy was unable to appreciate the nature and quality of wrongfulness of his acts, and that he could not have confirmed his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time of the incident in question. Additionally, Dr. James R. Marikangas, MD, a clinical professor of psychiatry at Yale University School of Medicine, reviewed the case and concluded that Murphy suffered from a severe mental illness and that his low intellectual functioning was consistent with organic brain damage, perhaps because of fetal alcohol syndrome.
Right, exactly. Yep. So we know, again, he's got a lot of issues and everything. But again, I just want to say, that, did this cause him to do this? We can't say that with any type of positive, yes, he did, based on these conditions. We know, though, from what we have researched in the case, that these can be some factors that can affect people's, emotions and things that they do in the future. Now, Murphy used the new psychological information when he filed an appeal in 1997. The court sided with Murphy on that occasion and sent the case back down to the lower court for review. So in June of 2008, took a while, the lower court reaffirmed his guilt for premeditated murder, but repealed his death sentence and gave him a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. So they did find that, hey, some of these mitigating circumstances with his traumatic childhood and some of those conditions, I think basically they just decided, hey, we probably don't need to sentence him to death. Let's just put him in life without the possibility of parole. So Murphy is currently incarcerated inside a federal prison, and he is now 60 years old. He has been incarcerated since August 1987.
So we have talked a lot about Murphy, his rough childhood, his alcohol issues, his mental health problems, and other things. But we do not want to forget the victims in this case that had their lives cut short that night. Petra Murphy, who by all accounts was a wonderful mother and a wife, Tim A. Herstrader, and James J. Murphy Jr., Petra's sons. We do not know what kind of men that they would have became.
That's correct, because their life was cut short by Murphy.
Do you think that Junior would have followed in his father's footsteps?
I don't think so, and I tell you the reason why. I think his mother, Petra, would have raised him correct, and she didn't drink, by all accounts, based on what he said. She is a born-again Christian. She didn't drink, and I think she would have raised him, as well as other family members, and probably, again, speculation, but probably in a home in which that wouldn't be something he would have to worry about, okay? Tim, too, I think would have, even though he wasn't his biological son. Yeah. So I hope everybody enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoyed doing this and getting the emails and everything. I hope it didn't psychologically affect you too much.
No, it didn't. I actually really enjoyed talking to him. I mean, some of the emails I got, I was taken aback by, but all in all, this has been a great experience, and hopefully we can get together and do it again on a different case.
For sure, we're going to do that.
Criminology Chats is brought to you by the Chicago School. For more information about the institution, please visit www.thechicagoschool.edu. I would like to extend my gratitude to the students who participated in this episode. This podcast is produced and edited by A.M. Peters, with additional post services provided by Audio Photo Synthesis. I'd like to give a special shout out to her, because if it wasn't for her, this episode and all episodes would not be possible. So thank you so much, Amy. I'm J.R. Rainbolt, your host, and I eagerly anticipate you listening to our next episode. Be safe out there.
The views and perspectives shared in these recordings are intended solely for informational purposes and do not reflect the official stance or policies of the speakers or the Chicago School. Any commercial products and manufacturers mentioned are included for informational reasons only and do not imply endorsement or approval by the speakers or the Chicago School.